We are live with SCI TV. I'm Joshua Gordon, the founder of the Sports Conflict Institute, joined by my co-host, Dr. Ken Pendleton. Ken, welcome. Hi, Ken. Great. And our guest today, Dr. Anne Shadle. Annie, welcome.
Thank you.
So we'd like to begin by asking you to give a more thorough introduction of how you got into the work that you do. So first of all, what is it that you do, and how did you get into it?
Yeah, so the work that I do is I work on the mental and emotional aspects of performance, and I came about this. I actually was asked this question last week in New York City, and someone asked me, Annie, how long have you been doing what you're doing? And I kind of hesitated for a second, and although I've been done with my graduate degree about a year and a half, I've actually been working on the emotional and mental aspects of performance since I was in college. And I say that because just being an athlete at the University of Nebraska and kind of then being one of the junior seniors on the team and one of the leaders on the team, I felt like my teammates would then look to me. And so a lot of times I was doing mental and emotional work with the younger athletes, not really even knowing that I was doing it at the time. So I guess I've always been very curious about the mind-body connection, and first as an athlete, really understanding that from a performance standpoint. So I ran track at the University of Nebraska, was two-time NCAA champion there, and I learned a lot about the mental emotional aspects being in Nebraska and being in that environment. And then from there ran professionally a few years, and again just still had that curiosity of what do the best athletes in the world do, and how do they think, and how emotionally are they, and how does that impact their performance. So that's always been a very curious question for me. And then from there, after the 2008 Olympic trials, I made the decision to go back to school and work on my graduate degree in sports psychology at the University of Missouri.
Ken, do we lose you, Ken?
No. Sorry, Josh, we miscommunicated. So okay, so Annie, I will bite. Tell me what is it a gold medal Olympic athlete does that other elite athletes don't do? What did you learn?
Yeah, so my research for my graduate work at the University of Missouri, we had a great team of a research team there led by Dr. Rick McGuire, who was our mentor and advisor, and then I was kind of the first part of a 4-part research study, and so my research focused on understanding the narratives of an Olympic champion. And so really I wanted to know what, from the athlete's perspective, what was going on. So what beyond their physical and technical training allowed them to win this Olympic medal. And so I really just wanted to hear the narratives of the story, and I just believe that there is a lot of power in storytelling and understanding someone's story and all of these experiences that we go through in life, and turning points that we have to navigate, and critical moments that we have to navigate. And I just kind of had this, I just kind of knew going into it from being around so many wonderful athletes and watching things happen, that if you just ask someone to tell you their story, especially an Olympic champion, they have an amazing story to tell you. And so my research did exactly that. I simply wanted to understand, how did you get started in the sport of track and field, and then take me to and through to your Olympic medal. And through that, just a lot of really great, rich understandings came from understanding how athletes had to navigate situations, the decisions they made, and then in the end, when it came time to perform, how they were able to control that moment is what I termed it, as controlling that Olympic moment. And really what that means is these athletes remained focused on their mission and were able to kind of block out all of these distractions and focus on themselves and deliver their best performance.
So you look at these very high-performing athletes. What were some of those common threads that helped them, essentially, as you're saying, control that Olympic moment, tune out the rest of the noise, and really perform? What were some of those themes that you saw across those, variety of narratives?
Yeah, I would say that these athletes were very self-determined. They had a great amount of intrinsic motivation, meaning that this was their dream, this was what they wanted, and they were pushing themselves. And with that comes then self-regulation. It comes the ability, that grit factor, that's the hot topic right now, is that grit, so that perseverance over time to stay dedicated to your goal. Other things that I think came out that were really important was the support system that these athletes had around them and their environment. And so they had people around them that I would say that they were positive relationships. And so through that, they had a team of people that were all on the same page, knowing where they were going and what they were doing. And I think that was another really big important piece, was that they had an environment and a support system that helped them to be successful.
So let's focus on controlling the moment. So did they control the moment at the Olympics differently than they did at the trials, or they would at a normal track meet, or was it basically something they practiced at relatively unimportant track meets, so it was second nature to them at that point?
Yeah. Any track meet, no matter what it is, there's going to be distractions, and sometimes there's things that happen that you're not really prepared for, and in that moment you've got to react and make decisions and stay focused on delivering your performance. As meet gets more intense and that pressure comes in, you think about the Olympic trials and you think about the Olympic Games, and that happens once every 4 years. And so these athletes are working day in and day out for 4 years for this one moment, and that happens at Olympic trials. They have to make the team so that they can make the Olympic team, right, to win a medal. So first, to be able to navigate through that Olympic trials and being able to navigate through, Dr. Tracy Statler says, she has termed it navigating the crazy. And so how do I navigate this environment, knowing a lot of distractions and things that can kind of derail me and throw me off my focus, but how do I keep myself focused? How do I keep myself calm and stay in control mentally, emotionally, and then physically to deliver my performance? And so I would say that these athletes had experiences prior to this in understanding that environment, but really they were very good at that emotional control and that mental control and that composure to be able to remain focused and deliver their best performance.
Now, Annie, is that something that they just have innate in them, and these are characteristics that carry across our highest competitors, or is this something that can be scaffolded and learned?
I believe that it's both. And I would say that in my research, when I started from how did you get started in the sport of track and field, I wanted to hear some of those early experiences and maybe some of those situations that they had to navigate through early on in their career. And so listening to the early experiences of maybe being in junior high track and then being in high school track, and then going to college, and then after that. So as I listened to these stories, there definitely were situations where they had to learn this skill, right? They had to learn this skill of focus. And so these athletes that won the medals are very skilled at that, being able to focus on what they need to do. So throughout their athletic careers, they have the opportunity to practice this skill set. Now, so if we say that that's innate, well, yes, they're probably very good at that, but they've also learned it because they've had experiences that allow them to practice this mental skill, being able to refocus, being able to deliver your best performance when the time matters. And so definitely these athletes are excellent at it, and they've also practiced it.
So okay, I'm an Olympic athlete, and I'm walking out for a track and field event, and it's not quite golf in terms of being monasterial, if you will, but I'm what kind of distractions could come up? I can think of two stories offhand. One is Usain Bolt, the way he came out in the 2008 Olympics and was joking around. And I can imagine that, he seemed so light. It was so at odds because you sort of figure they're in this incredible bubble. And the other one is in the 68 Olympics in the 200-meter final, there was actually a phone rang, and one of the contestants actually said to one of the guys who was a favorite, "Hey, that's for you, John. Why don't you pick it up?" And then I think of those, but they seem exceptional. So what kind of distractions did athletes talk about that could come up that they were able to tune out?
Sure, yeah. There's, as you shared, in the sport environment, there's tons of distractions, right? And some of these distractions come internally from our own thoughts and emotions and feelings, and then they come externally. So maybe our coach-athlete relationship and what's going on there. Maybe an injury happens. That is an external thing. Maybe there's lots of noise. Maybe the crowd. Maybe our lane got switched at the last moment. Maybe someone got injured. So there's lots of different distractions that can happen both internally and then externally that can impact performance. So I don't know if there's a whole list of things, I guess, that can definitely impact.
Yeah, I think it'd be fun to pull that thread a little further about what some of those distractors are, because a lot of folks, even have a hard time, I think, identifying what are distractors and what aren't. They're just things that are happening, and trying to figure out what requires a little deliberate attention to being able to manage and deal with is probably an important element.
Exactly. And different for each individual. So things that I might feel are distracting, they might not be distracting at all to you. So it's really understanding yourself as an athlete and how you best focus. I guess that's the point of how do you control that Olympic moment. It's understanding your own mind and your own focus and the things that you need to do to prepare yourself to deliver your best performance.
Yeah, and so any good stories that you came up with that as you were talking to these athletes, you said, wow, that is just an amazing stressor that you had in that moment, and to see someone be able to overcome it is truly part of that exceptional talent of athletic performance. Any examples of that to help illustrate and bring this to life as well?
Sure. Yeah, I've got lots of stories. My favorite story for my research was an athlete who had an injury late in the season of training, and so of Olympic year she was injured in February, and Olympic trials were in June, and so just everything that she went through in terms of having to make the decision to have surgery, then coming back to training. She laughed about some of the workouts that she did coming back, just knowing how slow she was. And to me, just seeing that humor of, oh my gosh, when I first did 300s, they were so slow. They were absolutely slow, ridiculously. It was awful. It was embarrassing. But she laughed about it. And so just seeing her humor and how she knew that was a part of healing to prepare to make the team, and so she knew that she had to navigate through those tough workouts, getting herself back fit, back strong, so that she could make the team. And then everything that she went through at Olympic trials with distractions, with shoe companies wanting to sign her because she was in the final Olympic trials, different stress there. When she gets to the Olympic Games, having some body issues, her back locked up, and then having to find a physio to work on her to get her ready when she's got 2 days to prepare, and then a last-minute change in the warm-up routine where she's got to get her mind right within 20 minutes to be able to be set to win this race, which she does, which is just absolutely incredible, just everything that she went through and how she just had such a strong belief in herself and what she was going to do. And I think just that ability and that confidence in herself, that just how patient she was with herself, and she never lost faith, I guess, and she just remained focused on what she set out to do and what she knew and what she believed that she could do.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to go back to the previous example I gave about the phone ring, because it occurred in the same race that Tommy Smith did the Black Power salute at the end of the run. But it's also the case that he had a very delicate hamstring, and he wasn't sure he could go all out. So
Right.
he had to actually put all that together
Right.
at that particular moment. Was your research mostly on shorter events, like like one of them was the hurdles, I know, were the other two similarly, like it occurs in a very...
They were shorter distances.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I always had this fear in that I'd have like a Homer Simpson moment and the starting theme going off, and I'd be like, hey, and I'd be daydreaming. But I'm making this up for a serious reason. Which, Josh, you run marathons. You're an elite marathon runner, which is something our guests probably, he may know, but some of the audience, a lot of the audience probably doesn't. And I'm wondering, Josh, and Annie, it seems to me are the demands, the pre-race demands, would be very different, because if I have a hamstring issue, Tommy Smith is thinking, I'm going to run at this pace, and I know at about 150, I'm going to open it up, right? And I'm going to all of a sudden, I'm just going to hope it works for 50 meters. Till then, and he had a very definite plan. I assume for a marathon, on the other hand, or even a middle distance race, you're going to have a pretty good idea at some point whether you can go to that pace, earlier on. And also, even if I was daydreaming at the start, at least I think I'd have a reasonable chance to make it up if I had my Homer Simpson moment, which I undoubtedly would. So
having a strategy, right? So now you're talking more of strategy and then your ability to focus. So as a shorter race is going to have a different strategy, and it's going to have a different focus, and it's going to have a different energy component than a marathon will, right? So the marathon, you're going to have to be able to focus for a very large amount of time, and that energy expenditure is very different. That energy management is very different on the marathon than it would be for the 100 meters or the 400 meters.
Right. I wonder where that magic point is where you stop thinking about, like, I imagine if I'm running 200 meters, nothing exists maybe except an opponent in a glance. But if I'm running the marathon, Josh, I assume, do you notice people on the side of the course and you start thinking about you'd like to be listening to, Cake right now, or what, how is there some magical point where all of a sudden it actually is appropriate not to be, you're locked in, but in a different way? Can you walk me as someone from the outside through the psychology of that?
Ken's trying to put me into my athlete hat here, and giving me way too much credit for my former marathoning career. But I will say that when you're talking about longer distances from the point of an athlete, I do think a lot of those distractions aren't even in the moment of competing, but all the build-up before, because inevitably you are going to be out of your routine. And you can try and simulate your routine when you're almost always traveling to your big competitions. But at the same time, you're looking at a number of other successful athletes around you, and they do things differently than you. And to be able to have that wherewithal, as Andy's mentioning, to say those are just a different way to success, but your path is also there, is very challenging, because it'd be very easy to go, oh, look, they have a better dinner than I do the night before. Maybe I should try a new food. Oh, look, they've got this special tape on their legs. Maybe I should try that, right? And to not get pulled out of it, I think is probably very challenging, to stay in that moment and not get distracted by all of that. But I'd love to hear Annie's thoughts on that.
Yeah, so to me, a little bit, that sounds a little bit like internal distraction, so your own thoughts and what you're perceiving, what you should be doing, and then external distraction, so there's lots going on in your environment that you're kind of curious about. And so really in that moment, to be able to deliver your best performance, it has to be full trust in what you've done, and knowing that you've done everything that you can, or you've done everything that you could have to prepare for this one moment. And a lot of athletes get themselves into trouble because they're looking to their left and they're looking to their right, not just focusing on themselves. And I would say from the athletes that I researched and interviewed, they were able to focus completely on themselves and remain focused on what they had set out to do, and didn't really pay much attention to what was going on. And that's a characteristic of a very elite athlete, is that they spend almost all of their time focusing on the things that they can control, which is their own mind, their own performance, their own preparation.
And you've taken that research that you've done, and you haven't just let it sit on a shelf. You've done the impressive thing of taking it and making it applied. And can you speak a little bit about, some of the messages you're sharing with audiences, but even more importantly, when you're working one-on-one with athletes, how are you taking that research and making it something that will become a performance benefit for them?
Yeah. So my applied, I guess the work from my research is it definitely was more of, I don't want to say friendly research, but it was definitely more friendly, where no matter if you're big into academics and research and those things or not, you can understand it. And I've taken the research to coaching education, whether that be IAAF and international coaching for elite athletes, as well as high school youth coaches, to the LA 84 Foundation, for example, was one that I took my research to, and from there it's educating coaches and educating athletes. And so here we have this beautiful model. So this research is, here's what the best athletes in the world are doing, here's what the best coaches in the world are doing, and how can we take some of these things that we're learning from this model and apply it down, so that when we're beginning sport, we're building it right. So we're creating an environment for our youth and for our high school and college where there is autonomy supported environment. So these athletes are being raised to be an independent athlete, so they're able to make decisions. They're able to work on their focus. They're able to be intrinsically motivated that this is their dream and we're here supporting them. So we're able to create a healthy environment for them to go run and have fun and do the best job that they can. And also, I've taken this and applied it to the business world. So these skills of focus, these athletes have this strong skill of focus. They're dedicated, they're determined, they've figured things out. They've been very strategic in how they've learned what they've learned and perfected their craft. And so being able to take that to businesses in terms of being able to focus, and how do you take that focus, and day in and day out, how do I remain focused on where I'm going and what I'm doing, and then have a team of people around me that, again, are supporting me, helping me, and together getting to where we want to be.
So you mentioned the idea of it controlling your environment, and I can really see that in terms of race routine. And
Yeah.
You mentioned the importance of social relationships, but what I think about right then is, boy, controlling social relationships can be a lot more difficult. And so, what are some of the problems you've seen there, and how do they control? How do the best athletes control those relationships?
Yeah. So part of the research, one of my research questions, I wanted to know what was going on in the athletes' lives. So I took a theory from positive psychology, Martin Seligman's theory on flourishing, and so the 5 elements that we analyzed the data for were positive emotion. So what experiences did these athletes have with positive emotion? Engagement, so to what extent were they absorbed in what they were doing? For example, did they like going to practice? Were they interested in that? Did they want to perfect this? So just looking at that engagement of what was happening in the athletes' lives. And then positive relationships. So did the athletes have positive relationships? Did they talk about that? Was that meaningful to them? How did they kind of build that around them? So positive emotion, engagement, positive relationships, meaning. So what meaning was this in the athletes' lives? Did they talk about meaning, purpose? And then the 5th element is achievement. And so through these stories, again, these athletes had positive relationships. And in one of the stories, the athlete shared about having to have a difficult discussion with her coach and getting on that right page, because she didn't feel like they were on the same page. She didn't necessarily like the way that she was being talked to, and he was treating her, and so they had to navigate through that, and they were able to have that difficult discussion, move through it, both at the end, be on the same page and be able to move forward. So again, it's kind of one, being able to navigate some of those relationship conflicts that may come up, but then also how do you nurture and grow positive relationships as well?
And so would you ever work with more than just the athlete? Would you expand it to, doing some of that same work with coaches, or even, whether it's significant others or agents or other people in their lives who become part of that support structure that you mentioned?
Yeah, so the way that I was trained with sports psychology from Dr. Rick McGuire was that it's a triangle, and you have the athlete and the coach and then the sports psychology consultant there, and you're working together. And I would also add to that model and say that the athlete's at the center. So the athlete is what matters. And so we all want the same thing. We all want this athlete to do great, run fast, throw far, jump high, long, whatever it is. We all want this athlete to be successful. And so it's being able to get everyone on the same page, moving forward with a common goal with that. So yes, I have done work with coaches, athletes, and myself. And I think that model is really great. I haven't done any with agents, but I think that could be another good model. I definitely think that the coach is really important. That coach-athlete relationship is what is most important. And having the two of them working together, aligned, common goal, common purpose, and then everyone else being able to support what they're doing together.
So let me just explore this a little more. So let's say you get put in the Olympic Village and you and your roommate don't get along. Is that that would seem to be an example of a negative relationship, right? You know,
That can be some problems.
Yeah, and so is that something that that the athlete's aware of going in? Do they try to manage that, know in advance who the roommate's going to be? Is it really is it a death blow? Like if you had a roommate who kept you, who never mind kept you up, but you like to say that person talked a lot and you like to be in a really meditative state before a race. Could that be the difference between that that gold medal and a bronze medal?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things in the Olympic environment that can be very distracting, and the best solution, I guess, is to be able to have some of those things planned ahead of time. And so with the athletes that I interviewed, they had a plan going into the Olympics. They had a system, a routine that was going to work well for them. So, for example, one athlete actually had a place to go outside of the village where it was kind of a good space for her. She was able to have her protected environment. She was able to kind of eat what she wanted to eat. And there are other coaches that have done the same thing for their athletes in terms of getting a house or getting something outside of the village where the athletes can come, where they can feel safe, where they can kind of be out of that Olympic village where there can be a lot of distractions there. And so really it's understanding ahead of time and planning ahead for some of these distractions and some of these things that they may be facing in the Olympic Village. And so if it's the athlete's first time making the Olympic team in this Olympic Village, it'd probably be a good idea to do some research, talk to some Olympians, figure out maybe what things do I need to be ready for, what things do I need to be able to plan ahead, prepare for, so that I can stay in as normal of a routine as I can, and what things do I need to stay calm, to stay relaxed, so that when it's my time to compete, I'm going to have a great performance.
Yeah, I imagine this becomes very amplified in Olympic sports where that opportunity to shine really is only once or twice in a career for most of the high-performing athletes, because if you look at the rates of return, medalists may come back for one more Olympics. Those who didn't medal often never return. And unlike some of the other sports where you might have playoffs every single year or lots of opportunities to play in tournaments and everything else, this showcase must be very challenging. To what extent are coaches and athletes embracing this part of their performance, and how much of it is an educational uphill battle that you're fighting and trying to lay new ground?
A little bit of both. I feel like track and field has a really great support system in terms of you can call other athletes that have come before you and ask them, well, how were you able to be successful in this environment? Coaches usually have a pretty good mentorship. So, okay, how did you handle this with your athlete? What things did you face? And then in terms of getting through that together, so having friends that are coaches, having your friends being similar athletes. So, for example, I'm in San Diego right now, and the Olympic Training Center is 15 minutes away from where I live, and those athletes together, all of them have this common goal. They all kind of have an understanding, and so that's kind of their team. So they're really close now, and then when they make the Olympic team, they already kind of have that set group of friends, that set group of teammates that can kind of help them through whatever might be going on. And I really think that there is a lot of strength within having good relationships with your teammates, whether you do the same event or not, in those stressful moments, because as a 1,500-meter runner, my 5K friend might be the best support system that I can have, that kind of helps keep me cool, kind of helps keep me relaxed, and someone that I like to be around. And so sometimes those relationships can be really helpful and really important during those moments.
So you looked in great detail at 3 athletes. Were their stories similar, or were there some major areas of divergence in terms of what influenced them to perform well? Were there
Yeah.
You talked about good, positive social relationships, controlling the moment. Were there any things they did that were really different from each other?
Yeah, I would say that each athlete was very different in terms of how they got to where they were and what their motivations were. All of them were intrinsically motivated, but for sure there was different motivations and different things that they were going after, and different ways that they motivated themselves and helped themselves through. So I would say, like, differently, things that I was thinking and saying to myself that motivated me, each of them were different. Each of them kind of had a different different viewpoint, which makes sense because no one's the same. And as an athlete, we know ourselves. I definitely believe that and think that is that as athletes, you know yourself. And so you know maybe what your strengths are, and you know maybe sometimes when you get yourself into trouble and how to keep yourself clear from trouble in terms of even thoughts and even environmental things. So just being able to know yourself and understand yourself, helping you get through all that. So each of the stories were different in terms of their process for navigating the Olympics and getting themselves ready to race. So maybe from an outside perspective, the preparation looks very similar, but from an internal perspective, each athlete, I think, is pretty. They're similar, but it's also different, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
And do you have a sense of how much of that motivation tends to come from, more positive places, or how much comes from more of a, competitive place or an angry place? So we often talk about the idea of the angry athlete, and people will build straw men up in their mind of how much they hate their competitor in order to drive themselves to a different place, and then others will do it from a very different motivational profile. What are you seeing in your interactions?
Yeah, so mine would be, what I'm seeing is more intrinsic motivation. So it's they're doing it for themselves. I want to get better. I want to be the best. I want to run this time. I want to master this technique. I'm just competitive. I want to win. I want to be the best. So definitely it's more of an internal drive, an intrinsic drive, than from a place of anger or things like that. It's more them pushing themselves and seeing what they can do.
It would be interesting to see if that's the case in sports where where you have more direct competition, or in teamwork, like basketball.
Right.
And I say that because I used to do a lecture on John Wooden, and one of the things that was unique about what John Wooden did is his players practiced the same routines. They did, for 2 hours, they did 5-minute routines, the same exact ones, the first day of practice in October as the day before the national final in March. And I had a bunch of students who were on the basketball team at the University of Oregon come to me and say, I could never play for him. I just couldn't do that. Plus, he didn't cuss, which bothered them too. But it occurs to me that would be very consistent with what track and field athletes have to do, especially when you're focusing on a shorter event or a technical event like in field, because it's like this almost like Zen-like relationship to it. Like you really are willing to focus exactly on how you stretch, on exactly what you do out of the gate, exactly what you do in the first 10 meters. And so that repetition would be consistent with intrinsic motivation, whereas when you play a game where you're a team game, or a game where there's such direct competition where someone's trying to prevent you from doing something, I wonder if there would be more extrinsic motivators that would actually come into play. Yeah, just a thought. I don't know if you've given that any.
I'm going to say that the strongest driver is going to be that intrinsic motivation, and that doesn't mean that there's no extrinsic motivation in that, but in terms of the athletes that I've researched, and then as well as athletes that we've done some assessments on, that intrinsic motivation is higher than that extrinsic motivation. So that doesn't necessarily mean that there's no extrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation is bad, but intrinsic motivation has to be stronger than that extrinsic.
Yep.
I think it also is like how an athlete's interpreting it as well. So it's definitely more of an interest area for research too, for sure.
We often wonder if you run across an athlete that struggles with that intrinsic motivation, are they simply done, or is there a way to externalize that motivation in a positive way as well?
Yeah, I think it comes back to that meaning and purpose. So why is this important to them? And sometimes maybe we forget that, and that motivation sometimes gets changed, or we sometimes get a little lost in remembering kind of why we first started doing this and what we set out to do, and connecting back to that foundation again of understanding why is this important to me, why do I enjoy this. And so I think sometimes that's important to be able to connect back to that foundational piece of that meaning and purpose.
Yeah, fantastic. And so I think it's really, a lot of people can relate to this idea of having these Olympic moments in their life. And any final thoughts as we wrap up here about, you know, how people can take this concept and apply it, whether it's sports or elsewhere?
Yeah, I definitely think it's really about focus. I think it's definitely about focus and being able to have that mental control, emotional control, and especially for whatever that performance aspect is. So controlling the Olympic moment doesn't necessarily mean every 4 years at the Olympic Games, but it's day in and day out, these being able to kind of respond in these critical moments, whatever that is. In our personal relationships, like how can we respond in the way that we want to so that our personal relationship is what we want it to be? And you know, how do we ask for that promotion? How do we make this proposal? How do we kind of prepare for some of those big performances of our lives, whatever that might be?
Fantastic. And for those who want to follow your work and get access to you and your thoughts beyond this particular show, how they do that?
Yeah, so my Twitter is at Annie H. Shadle, and you can also email me. My email is ashadle1@gmail.com, and I'm hoping to have a website up soon and lots more information for you there.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing some of your thoughts, your research, and your experience with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.